Thank you for joining us, everybody.
Wow, great crowd. Hello, everybody.
It's an honor to be here with you guys and Mike with you. Put this down. I'd heard there was a new book coming out. Try it. They kind of need to read.
I think I'm actually selling more Kindle copies than hardcover.
I was going to say, I was going to ask you to autograph this afterwards.
Yeah, there you go.
It got some questions lined up, but I do remember it was in this very room not long ago. You and I were talking about Intel for the documentary.
The PBS.
The PBS American documentary. Yeah. And as you and I were talking and watching, you pointed out there was Arthur Rock standing right next to
Gordon
Moore having a conversation. And I remember taking a shaky, horrible iPhone photo of that historic moment. But that had to be something of an inspiration to see those guys together.
Yeah, and perhaps the last time. I mean, there was a sense that history was turning that night. I should say, you know, you and I could literally swap seats here. Because I'm the guy that had the interview show on PBS, and you're the guy that covers Silicon Valley every day and knows what's going on. So maybe halfway through we'll switch roles.
Okay, well, I do cover it, and obviously the emphasis, and we've had this discussion before, and sort of lamented the fact that Silicon Valley only looks ahead and so rarely looks back. But those of us that don't look back are missing something, and really missing what's going to come next. Intel, a perfect example. I mean, you have one of the early spin-offs, those are sexy now, making money for investors through a stock offering, 3 volatile people.
Yes.
Some VC money. I mean, they really laid the groundwork for what we see now.
Exactly. It really all begins there. I've gotten a lot of, the question I get most in all the interviews on the book is, how dare I suggest that Intel is the most important company in the world? And everyone says, well, you know, they haven't done that well these last 5 years, and you know, why not Facebook? It's got 1 million members, and why not Google? Because it's the access point to the internet. And what I always tell them is, if tomorrow morning the employees of Intel just decided to sleep in, that they were tired of doing Moore's Law for 50 years, that all of this would just grind to a halt. I mean, it might take 10 years, but we live in a world defined by Moore's Law. And Intel is it's the high church of Moore's Law, and they're the high priests. They're committed to the death to keep Moore's Law moving forward. And it gives us the world we live in of constant change and accelerated reality and all the things we become accustomed to. But it's not a law. It's a contract. It's a social contract. Intel is essentially, and the other companies that are now in the biz, Samsung and Qualcomm and all the rest, they've made a commitment to keep this thing going, to drive the technology forward. They don't have to do it. And if they decide they don't want to do it anymore, all of this ends.
Is it still accurate, because it has been said before, that Intel and the semiconductors are the basis for everything that came after and everything we still see today?
Yeah, and we're so far up the food chain now. I mean, you think about it, we're doing Uber and
right.
Autonomous cars and all of those things. We're so far up, we're so many generations removed from the world of chips that we forget that it all runs from there. It all emanates from there. And the reason we have this progress is because Moore's Law flips every 24, 36 months and gives us a whole new set of opportunities and keeps us moving forward.
I want to get inside the book, but first I want to just, what struck me as the cover, there is a long-running debate, obviously, science, theology. You titled this The Trinity.
The Trinity, yes.
And okay, yeah, there are 3 people, but the Trinity is, there's a religious, it's not a very subtle reference.
Well, if you follow my career, no one's ever accused me of lack of hyperbole. And, it was originally going to be trilogy, and I thought, that's not enough. Because the more I thought about it, it really is kind of a biblical trinity. I mean, you got Noyce the father of Silicon Valley. You've got Gordon and his law, sort of the Holy Spirit of the electronics revolution. And then you have the difficult but ultimately successful son, Andy Grove. And there's all sorts of passions going to work in all of this. Andy's relationship with Bob is really complicated. And I'm not sure I even understand it now. In fact, I gave Andy the very last word in the book. I went over to his office in Los Altos and talked to him. And I'm not going to give you the last sentence. You guys can read it. But what Andy said, after all I knew about his history with the other 2 founders, what he said to me knocked me out of my chair, because it was just the opposite of what I thought, and suggesting that even Andy doesn't fully understand his relationship to noise. So I had to call it Trinity. Just no way around.
Yeah. The history of theology is filled with complexities.
Yep.
Maybe some paranoia.
Yeah, oh,
Intel's famous
absolutely.
for that.
No shortage of that.
And actually, it doesn't stop with Intel. I mean, you look at the reverence during the life of and even past the life of Steve Jobs, it borders on, I would say, a following.
Oh, sure.
Not merely a respect, but a following.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look back, there's a series of key figures in the Valley's history. And it starts with Terman at Stanford. He makes all this happen. He sets the ground. Then Packard. Packard's the first world historic figure to come out of the Valley. And he's the leader of the Valley up until the 60s. Then it's Noyce. And then Noyce acts as a father figure to Jobs. I mean, people don't really appreciate that. But Steve, Steve grew up right over here.
Right.
About 12 blocks that way. And he was kind of a lost kid. And he couldn't find a mentor worthy of him until he ran into Bob Noyce. And, he instantly realized, I think, that Noyce would always be able to teach him something, no matter how successful he was. And so you look at the story of Apple, it's really, Apple's patterning itself on Hewlett-Packard, but Jobs is patterning himself on Bob Noyce. And Noyce's early death really shattered Steve Jobs. I mean, people don't appreciate how much it did. It grew him up. Steve Jobs grew up twice. I mean, if you knew the early Jobs, that's a pretty obnoxious guy. I mean, Noyce's death and then Jobs' illness. Those are the two things that created the Steve Jobs of legend. And I think now Jobs' reputation, which couldn't get any higher 3 or 4 years ago, is slowly fading as this next post-millennial generation comes along. And they're looking at, they're trying to look at Mark Zuckerberg, but that isn't going to work. I think they're focusing on Elon Musk. I think Elon Musk is the next major figure in the Valley story.
But I would still put forth, and I've had this discussion with them, Aaron Levy at Box, Jack Dorsey at Square, they are still looking at what Jobs was able to do at various stages of his career and saying, this is what I want to do to get to that point.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Talking recently to Andy, he suggested that there's something happens every once in a while in the business world where people just seem to accelerate away from everybody else, and they do something that's unimaginable, that they reset the rules of what you can accomplish. And we saw that first with Hewlett-Packard, with the great run of the HP way from 57 to 74. Then we saw it at Intel, where Intel just takes the world with the processors, with the x86 processors, and changes everything and keeps up this amazing pace. Then Jobs gives us maybe the greatest run of innovation in history, where he produces 3 category-creating $100 billion industries, one after another, every 3 years. That's when business becomes something almost supernatural, and these guys who do it. And if you talk to them, they're all terrified. They don't even know what they're doing in the thick of it, but they keep going. And that's worthy of a story to be told, I think. These singular individuals and how they did it. Not just with the results, but just what made them who they were.
You know, one person, and you and I have talked about this, who hasn't gotten his due really is Robert Noyce.
Yes.
I mean, his name is on the building. There's a certain legendary status, but we don't know as much about him. There's an amazing story you tell in the book where he had a pilot's license, which not only scared Andy Grove, but once almost took the life of both Noyce and Steve Jobs.
Yeah, they went flying.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's one of those like Richie Valens moments.
Yeah, it would have been a Richie Valens moment. It would have been Buddy Holly. It would have been the end of the digital age, at the end of a runway. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's why they don't let a lot of modern CEOs do that kind of stuff. But I know that Jim Morgan and Bill Davidow and Bob Noyce used to go helicopter skiing up in the Bugaboos.
Wow.
And they finally quit the year. I think 12 people died in avalanches, fellow skiers. And I remember talking to Jim Morgan about it. You guys know Jim Morgan, chairman of Applied Materials. He said he and Davidow